At the start of this year, I created this theme for myself: feel good, have fun, enjoy. Last year, I didn't feel so good, so that became a real priority for me. But the more I sort of leaned into the idea of feeling good, the more I realized that feeling good is a lot less about the things that you do, and it's a lot more about the thoughts that you have while you do things. So I decided to make managing my mind a big part of my feel good journey. And this year has been one of the most happy years, and by happy I mean I feel generally content with life. Interestingly, at least two of the habits that I'm going to talk about in this video really oppose some common advice. I wouldn't call them controversial, but 2 years ago, if I told myself these pieces of advice, I might have been like, huh? But the traditional advice didn't work for me, and this did. So I want to share it, take it with a grain of salt. Habit number 1. If you've ever been around a little kid and you've seen them trip, fall, and then look directly at you, you know that how they react highly depends on how you react. If you freak out, you panic, you run up to them, you're like, oh my god, are you okay? They're gonna start bawling and it's gonna be a big deal. Most parents know not to react this way, so if they see their kid have a little stumble, instead they'll be like, hey, you okay? And not make a huge fuss unless it's clear that it's an actual big injury. This year, I started to get really intentional about treating my difficult feelings in the same way. And this is such a big shift from how I have treated these feelings in the past. I used to get so much content on my Instagram, on my TikTok, on my YouTube, all about feeling your feelings, self-soothing. Your feelings are valid, your feelings are important. And I know that content has been so helpful to so many people. But for me, what it made me do was hyper-fixate on my feelings and react really strongly to feelings that just weren't as big of a deal as I was making them out to be. So I'd notice these feelings of demotivation, sadness, maybe a bit of anxiety, and I'd go straight into, it's okay to have these feelings. Your feelings are valid. Feel your feelings. Maybe you need a break. Maybe you need a rest. Maybe today's just not your day. It's okay to have bad days. The way that I reacted to that feeling kind of turned me into that kid that can't get over a graze because their parent is acting like they have a missing leg. And I never told myself it's not okay to have these feelings. But reacting so strongly to those feelings was almost a way of telling myself that it's not okay to have these feelings. And when I reacted in these ways, it's like those feelings just kept on lasting way longer than they should. This is a hard one to talk about because all feelings are valid and it is important to self-soothe and do all of the things. But sometimes it's really helpful to not treat your feelings like they're a big deal. Some feelings just need to be treated like, you know, a little stumble, not a broken leg. You notice it, you kind of move on. And I'd heard so much advice on, you know, don't feel bad about feeling bad before. But I feel like this year was the year where I really was able to embrace that advice. And I did it by becoming unfazed by my feelings. And in the same way that a toddler gets over their grazes way more quickly when you react less, my feelings just seem to dissipate quicker when I react less to them. This has taken a lot of practice, and I'm not saying that I'm perfect at it yet, but I am so much better at it than I ever was. And it's been life-changing. Feelings that used to last a really long time now last way shorter amounts of time. Habit number 2. So at some point last year, I read this passage in a book. Some cutting-edge research shows that you can reduce your social anxiety very significantly just by dropping the worry process before a social event and the post-mortem assessment after the event. And this advice changed my life, which is so funny because it's a way less complicated way to say something that my partner says all the time that I've always just rolled my eyes at, which is just stop thinking about it. Just stop thinking those things. And it turns out that there is a form of therapy, metacognitive therapy, where that's kind of the whole base of their message. Metacognitive therapy compares your thoughts to just everyday wounds. The human body has developed the ability to heal wounds pretty quickly. If you get a bloody elbow, it'll heal itself. But if you pick at that wound, you scratch at that wound, you make it fester and get worse. And in the same way that your elbow is going to heal if you don't touch it, metacognitive therapy proposes that if you don't pick at and scratch at your thoughts, they'll take care of themselves. And obviously this is a really nice idea, but how are you supposed to stop having thoughts? The answer is you don't. Whenever you notice your brain ruminating, worrying, or just overthinking something that's not helpful, you let it do its thing, you just stop giving those thoughts your attention. I used to think that when people said just stop thinking about it, what they meant was suppress those thoughts, like push them away, which is categorically terrible advice. Research has proven this over and over. Pushing your thoughts away and trying to get rid of them is a bad idea. But what people like my partner who suggest this idea often actually mean is stop giving those thoughts so much of your attention. Instead, treat these thoughts like they're videos that are appearing on your TikTok algorithm. You can't stop something from appearing on your TikTok For You page, but you can control how much you engage with it. You can control how much attention you give it, which in turn controls how much similar content appears on your feed. Dr. Michael Greenberg, who is an expert on rumination, says, directing attention is like mentally holding on to something. You don't need to grab onto something else. It's okay for thoughts to be there as long as you don't direct attention towards them or try to figure them out, which is what we often do. And it's the same as picking and scratching at wounds. It makes things worse. Habit number 3. This is the most probably external habit that I'm going to talk about in this video. This year I went on this remote working trip. I went to Bali. I think there were about 14 people that were on this trip and we all stayed in the same villa. So I was surrounded by people all the time. When I got home, it was like crickets in comparison. Not to say that I don't have the most wonderful friends. I live with 2 of my favorite people, but I do work from home and it gets lonely in comparison to a villa full of people that you can co-work with. Connection is also one of my biggest self-care activities. You know how some people say that they need to work out for their mood, like it makes them really happy? I think that connection is my equivalent. I always say when I don't see people, I get weird. I get into my head. I think about myself too much. I'm just not at my cutest. So after getting home from Bali, I introduced habit number 3, which is meeting new people. I set a goal to just meet as many new people as possible. My focus wasn't like make friends. It was just introduce yourself to as many new people as you can. I really wanted people that were available during the week. Selfishly, I was like, I want people I can co-work with, people I can get coffee with during the week. And I managed to find exactly that, but also people to hang out with on the weekend, people to go thrifting with, people to hike with. When I tell you that when I set this goal, I went insane, I am not kidding. You guys actually saw the start of me pursuing this in my video on how to make life interesting. I think I set like 4 dates with new people in 1 week and I kind of kept up that pace. I reckon I've met like 15 new people in the last month for like one-on-one dates. I've also been to book clubs and events. Like I went ham. Luke was watching me do this and he was like, you're actually insane. But I got what I wanted. To me, this is what manifestation looks like, going insane. And I really think that meeting new people can be one of the most impactful habits that you can ever build. Because connection isn't just good for someone like me. Connection is good for everyone. Connection beats pretty much every other self-care measure out there when it comes to your health and your happiness. Studies have shown this over and over again. Habit number 4. So recently I got my hair done. If you've been on my Instagram, you saw this. It went a little more brown than I wanted. I just walked out of there feeling a little less blonde, which wasn't the goal. There are 2 reactions that I could have to this. Number 1, I could embrace should energy. So they shouldn't have gone so dark. They should have done better. They should have offered to make it lighter when I mentioned it was a little dark. Or there is preference energy. So it would have been better if she went blonder, but it is what it is. It'll fade. Worst comes to worst, I call her up, we fix it. If you just listen to those statements side by side, you can feel which one has healthier energy. Preference energy is about focusing on what you can control and not fixating on what you cannot. And that is the energy that I immediately stepped into because I have been practicing habit number 4, no shoulding, no musting. Albert Ellis has this quote, there are 3 musts that hold us back. I must do well, you must treat me well, and the world must be easy. Must energy and should energy consistently lead to deep unhappiness and resentment and clinging to things that you can't control. I'm convinced that the more must or should energy you have in your life at any given time is directly equivalent to how unhappy you are. The more must and should energy, the less happy you're gonna be. So here's what I do whenever I notice myself leaning into must or should energy. I ask myself this question, which has been a game changer for me. It's inspired by the book Forgive for Good by Fred Luskin, and it is, am I unhappy with the circumstances I'm in right now? Or am I unhappy that I can't enforce my should? Really sit with that question. It always blows my mind. More often than not, I'm unhappy that I can't enforce my should. I'm not that unhappy with what exists. Then I just transform my should into preference statements. So I use phrases like the ones on the screen. Just enforcing the mental habit of following those 2 steps. Whenever you notice yourself shooting on yourself, shooting on other people, shooting on the world, it's gonna be life-changing. Your happiness will go up, especially if you're someone who currently leans into should energy. I also actually created a tool on my app Intention called the Should Shifter that guides you through how to shift to should. I use this all the time. I would recommend starting with any little shoulds in your life, like when someone cuts you off in traffic or is kind of rude to you at the store. Go through this should shifter process or just use those 2 steps that I talked about and just start making this an everyday practice. I'm convinced that the more you lean into preference energy, the happier you are, and I've really seen that for me. Habit number 5. You know how sometimes when you're driving to somewhere where you always travel, like your local grocery store or even home, and then all of a sudden you kind of look around and you're like, oh wow, I've just driven for like 10 minutes and I wasn't paying attention and now I'm here. A lot of your day-to-day behaviors that are preventing you from achieving your goals are exactly like that. All of a sudden you look around, you realize you procrastinated your workout habit for an hour, now you gotta miss it. But nearly all of these behaviors aren't as mindless as we think they are. There's a step-by-step pattern behind them, and they almost always start with a mental habit, which is why habit number 5 is becoming aware of your mental habits. Once you start mapping out your mental habits, you're gonna start seeing them everywhere. The way that Judd Brewer maps out mental habits is using the trigger behavior reward map. So for example, your trigger might be you feel a little low. The behavior might be you go and you buy something online. The reward could be a hit of dopamine or a sense of control. A life-changing exercise that you can start doing for yourself is just mapping out these little behaviors that are messing with your life. I have become so much more conscious of my behavior maps this year and probably a bit last year, and I've noticed patterns in my life that I just never noticed before. But mapping out your behaviors is really just step 1. I would also advise applying step 2. Pick 1 or 2 of the most unhelpful behavior maps that you've found exist in your life, and then apply WHOOP. WHOOP is a process created by Gabrielle Ottington, and I'm going to go into detail on how to apply that process, but first, I want to tell you a bit more about how it has worked. So Gabrielle created a study with 256 participants. They were divided into 2 groups. One of the groups was told to use WHOOP whenever they could. The other group was given a bunch of information about healthy eating and exercise. Both groups were given a quiz to make sure that they understood the benefits of healthy eating and exercise. The participants that used WHOOP exercised twice as much as the participants who were just given information. And after 2 years, they were still eating significantly more fruit and vegetables than the other group, even though the researchers stopped checking in with them after about 4 months. Using WHOOP regularly is a powerful exercise, but it's also not very glamorous. Here's how to do it. First, pick a behavior. Then identify your wish. So what you'd prefer that behavior to look like. What would you like to do instead of your bad habit? Then visualize your outcome. So see yourself behaving in the way that you want to behave. Contrast that with how you behave now. So you facing that mental habit and then behaving in a way that you're not a fan of. Then create a plan. Use the if-then format. So if I notice myself feeling low and I get the urge to go online shopping, instead, I'm gonna go make myself a cup of tea and get a book. You want to keep on using the WHOOP process over and over again, ideally on a daily basis, and it can be done in like 5 minutes. This isn't an intensive process. If you liked this video, you're definitely gonna like my video on 7 ways to build discipline. It's one of the better videos that I've made recently. I think it's just because it's filled with all of my personal principles around behavior change that I believe so strongly. I'm gonna have that video linked on the screen as well as down below. I appreciate you so much, and I will see you soon.